Welcome to Carrying Wayward, a supernatural podcast for fans who aren't ready to let go and newcomers to the series who are ready to jump in. I'm Drew Schulman.
And I'm Marie Vigourou. In this episode, we're diving into Supernatural Season 8, Episode 10, Torn and Frayed. Let's get this show on the road.
This episode was kind of bland.
I think it's going to be a short and a sweet one for us.
For once, Sam gets some development, which is a great treat.
I know. Interestingly, it's because he's away from Dean, but, you know.
I think we've discussed that in the past, actually.
That's the thing, right, with the kind of relationship that they have. It's that it's so codependent that, like, when they are together, they're just not growing as much as they could if they were apart, unfortunately.
This week, patrons and coffee supporters got to hear us answer the question, if you had a houseboat, what would you do with it? On the supporter-exclusive Impala Talk feed. You can go to carryingwayward.com to support us and claim your perks.
Are we ready for this short episode's short recap?
Count me down.
3, 2, 1, stow your crap.
Samandriel's been kidnapped by Crowley and is being tortured, and they're trying to get information out of him. Ultimately, they learn that there is an angel tablet. Ooh, big reveal, which is actually kind of cool. Like, I'll give them points for that one. And we learn there's some weird programming with angel brains. It's weird. Naomi, who's been taking over the scenes from behind the scenes for Cass, is all like, you gotta go save Samandriel. And then they do. And there's a lot of stuff along the way, but really we'll get into the story bits later. But really, they ultimately go and they save him, only to have Cass murder him because he's been, air quote, compromised, according to Naomi. And then we learn that Cass has some trauma going on that he didn't know about. Maybe his own mind can't be trusted. That's really it time.
This episode was written by Jenny Klein, directed by Robert Singer, and it originally aired on January 16th, 2013.
The show still feels like a show from 2005 in my head. So seeing 2013, which is still like 11 years ago, is like more modern than I remember.
And this episode was actually the first one after the mid-season finale. So like we get a longer road so far, you know, just to make sure that we haven't forgotten anything that's been going on, right? Which was actually good for us because we haven't recorded in a bit. So like it was a break for us too.
Parallels.
So Crowley, like you said, is torturing Samandriel, and it's not always Crowley per se. It's either him or like his Dr. Goon, demon, whatever.
Basically doctor character who I think gets a name at some point. I think I saw it at some point and I was like, doesn't matter.
He dies at the end, so it doesn't really, like, we don't have to remember his name. So he's Dr. Demon Goon.
Goons?
So while Samandriel is being tortured, he's also calling for help from Naomi. So he's like communicating with Naomi in one way, which is going to become important near the end of the episode. Sam and Dean pick up pretty much exactly where they left off. They're arguing about Benny and Amelia. Do you remember when Dean in Southern Comfort was like, you left me to die for a girl?
Yes.
Well, it sort of feels like Sam is going through his own moment right now, where he's like, you know, you save a vampire by making me believe that the woman I love might be dead. He's like, basically like, you fake text me for a vampire.
It's very funny to sort of see the two of them almost having the like back and forth of like, well, you did this. Well, you did this.
Honestly, it drives me crazy. The good thing, I guess, is that it only lasts one episode. Although, to be fair, we have been getting that from Dean for like since the beginning of the season. But whatever. We're let's look forward, not back. So when Cass is watching Dean sleep and Dean wakes up scared, he goes, how many times do I have to tell you? It's creepy. I must say, listeners, that I am particularly enthralled at the idea that this happens regularly.
The way it is worded, the way like the quote you use is direct, but it is 100% implied. This is not the first time, and it is not like a once or in a while thing. It is fairly frequent.
How many times do I have to tell you? Like, this is the kind of stuff that I tell my son when, like, you know, I'm like, how many times do I have to tell you? You have to do this when you get home from school. You know, like it's one of those things that you say all the time.
I love the implications so much.
And these are only the times that Dean wakes up. So Cass has a really lovely quote in this episode. He's asking for Dean's help because he's realizing that like he's not a great hunter, and he's like, it seems like this is going to involve talking to people. And I have to say that, Cass, I have never related to you more than in that moment.
We've been getting this development in Cass, I think, since like last season, and now kind of this like the more human side of Cass. Like he's learning to fit in among humans and picking up more humane traits. And I think the idea of him being kind of, I don't want to say introverted per se, but like not like a good communicator person to person is such an apt like thing for him to pick up on and just sort of be like, nope, that's a you thing, Dean.
I also wish that my golden retriever boyfriend would be doing like the speaking to other people. We find out that Amelia doesn't know about Sam's hunting. Like, she knows that it's something sketchy. She's like, yeah, I get it. Like, I get that this is sketchy, like whatever it is that you do. I don't know. I think that it's a pretty big secret to keep from someone that you live with for almost a year or something.
I think that's part of the moving in conversation. Like, while we understand from Amelia's father, it was a very like rushed relationship and it was very quick. I think the point where you decide to purchase a home together is when you have to divulge the I've committed many murders in my time, all for good reasons, because I hunt demons.
Well, the thing is, like, I'm thinking about Dean's like long-term relationships, and he always ended up telling them, right? When we think about Cassie, he told her, and that's what broke them up. Lisa knew. Obviously Cass and Benny knew about it.
I mean, I guess Sam's had like hookups with people who were like involved in the case, so they know what they do. But I mean, really, like, Sam's, like, longer-term relationships.
Jess didn't know.
Amelia didn't know, and then the only other, like, long-ish term relationships were with the demons, so.
Yeah, Ruby. And Ruby knew. There's at least that.
Ruby would be very shocked if it was sprung on her all of a sudden. By the way, I slay your kind. Dinner later?
So we find out, I guess, that angel blades also kill demons. Did we know this? I feel like we knew this.
When it came up to, I had a moment where I was like, is that a reveal? Like, I could not tell you. Like, I really, like, if someone knows or can point us to it, like, I think it may have been implied at some point, or, like, this is just them, like, confirming it and putting it, like, on text. But, like, good to know.
I think the thing is that, like, in later seasons, they just have an angel blade with them at all times. And so maybe I've kind of forgotten that they didn't necessarily do that before. But no, I guess, because, like, angels would smite the demons, right?
We've never seen anyone but an angel use an angel blade, except for, I think, like, Crowley once wielded one briefly.
But against an angel, no?
Every time an angel's gone after a demon, it's just been, like, hand on head.
So it was a reveal. Lore drop. Hello. So angel blades also kill demons.
Is the demon knife made from angel blade material? Like, do we learn that ever? Like, that'd be a really cool secret reveal. I'm assuming they never touch it.
Nope. Never. I mean, maybe they used like the one angel blade and like melted it into different demon blades.
Is that how he made the bullets for the Colt? Is it made with angel steel?
Oh, maybe. Maybe that's a thing later.
We'll have to do some lore diving. I'll do a little digging.
So Cass is completely frozen by the torture that Samandriel is being subjected to. We see some flashes to things that we hadn't seen before, right? So we didn't know that this was going on. But it sort of seems like Naomi was subjecting Cass to some kind of similar torture.
A little bit of unlocking memories through, like, suffering there, like kind of the shared suffering, reminding him of the suffering he went through. Again, this is going to be a patented, I'm going to ask a question, which you're just going to nod silently to because you can't answer me, but I want to say it out loud for the listeners and the potential ramifications of tweets I'll receive later. Is this something that only Cass has experienced, or is the angel torturing drills in heads that he was remembering something that more angels go through than just him and Samandriel? I don't know, just the way they talk about it, the way it's kind of like alluded to, I feel like maybe there's some deeper, darker secrets in the angel community we're not finding out about.
Samandriel says they're controlling us, right? So is us just the two of us, or is us, like, as a whole, the angels?
This isn't just the two of them. Naomi's doing some shenanigans I don't like.
We shall see. We do find out that there's an angel tablet, like you said, which, cool.
Implication here is now it's a race to find the demon tablet or the angel tablet. Although if he does get an angel tablet, he still needs someone like Kevin to translate it, I would assume. And then I guess there is a ritual type thing to perform similarly to closing the demon gate of closing angel gate heaven door portal.
Well, I was going to ask, what do you think that the angel tablet says?
Ooh, what does it say? That's actually different wording. I think up until now, my brain was very much just like the demon tablet, it could cut angels off from coming to Earth. But maybe it's more, and given what we've seen angels with the whole programming, as Crowley put it, maybe it's controlling angels, which seems way worse than banishing them.
Maybe.
Yeah, that's what I want. Crowley with an army of angels.
I also do want to highlight that quote that I talked about earlier, which is Simandriel saying, that heaven is controlling us. And so it's not quite clear, like you said, if it's the angels or if it's Cass and Simandriel. And of course, because of that, Naomi has Cass kill Simandriel.
Which, again, was one of those, I was really expecting the, almost more obvious twist of, this is where he finally is able to break the spell and save Simandriel and, tell Sam and Dean, there's an evil angel controlling me. But, no. Full on just murders the dude, bleeds from the eyeballs, and fucking leaves.
We'll talk about that, right?
As a viewer who, again, as everyone knows, new to the show, I tend to do that thing where I guess what's going to happen next, and I would say 90% of the time I'm right. And again, that's just it's media literacy. It's watching enough of these shows to kind of get the oh, the surprise twist is she's the bad guy. So when they are able to actually leave me kind of oh shit, I was wrong. It always makes the episode, well, as a whole, not better. It made that ending a little better. I legit thought he was going to find a way to get out of it and save.
But then there would be no season 8, my darling.
I'm learning that now.
Dean tells Sam both feet in or both feet out. Anything in between is what gets you dead. And this is a thing that we basically watched Dean learn in season 7. So we know two things. One, he's in a better mental state now than he was in season 7. So that's one thing that from this moment we're learning. So even though he is still very affected by what happened in Purgatory, he's still doing better than he was in season 7. But the second thing we learn is that Dean learns. And I don't mean that as a diss, by the way, to Dean, but I do mean it more in the sense of wow, that's a really big life lesson to learn.
And we've been so critical of Dean not learning. Yes, I think if we look at him in a very zoomed out lens, season 1 to 8, yes, there's clear things he has learned and adapted and changed. But having such a defined him figuring shit out moment and being very vocal about it is a huge growing point for him.
Yeah, definitely. Cass ends up leaving the Winchesters, Sam leaves Amelia, and Dean leaves Benny. There are lots of breakups in this episode.
I see it very much as 2 breakups and I need some space.
Yeah.
This isn't Cass breaking up with Dean. Dean breaks up with Benny. That's a thing. And my heart is broken.
Well, I mean, I feel like Cass is doing a bit of a Peter Parker, right? So I call it the Peter Parker, which is I need to break up with you for your own good. And I think that's what's happening. So I'm calling it a breakup more in jest. I genuinely mean that Dean breaks up with Benny. That is, I'm not joking about it.
I have lots to say about that. We'll save that for story time, though.
So this week, our theme is release. And I had mentioned earlier, we've been talking that there are many breakups in this episode. So what better theme to discuss than release? So this word comes from an old French word that means to relinquish, to quit, to let go, to leave behind, and to abandon. And personally, I really kind of like this idea of letting go here because it's very visual to me, right? One moment you're holding onto something in your hands, right? And the next, you're not anymore. And I kind of love that because I feel like there's a lot of that going on in this episode. Like it's going from a state of being held to a state of being unheld. And whether that's a good or a bad thing, it really is going to depend on context.
Release can be good or can be bad. There's no, it's not set in stone. It's a matter of situation.
If we start with Dean, because he's the one who starts off this episode like telling Sam that he doesn't know if he's done with Benny yet, which is kind of interesting. So he's still very much holding on to Benny. He's like, no, I think I'm not quite done with that. Like, I don't quite know, but I don't think I'm done. And it's interesting because Dean has been telling Benny since episode 1 this season that, like, you know, they shouldn't contact each other. And he's also hiding Benny's calls. And at the same time, like, the second that Benny calls, he drops everything and he goes to help, right? So again, we have this very Dean thing of like saying one thing and then meaning another. Like he says that they're done to Benny's face, but he doesn't really mean it. And to Sam, he's like, well, I don't know if we're done. And he's actually very much still holding on to Benny, I think. And his relationship with Benny, like he's not ready, I think, to let it go at all at the beginning of the episode.
Dean wants to stop because somewhere in his head he still is trying to believe that it's wrong because it's how he was brought up, and befriending a vampire is undoing so much inside of him.
I wish I knew how to quit you.
Very much the line I had in mind when I wrote that. And while he is unlearning so much John-isms, there are some that like I don't think he realizes are tied to John, but just being a hunter in general, and thus having to unlearn even more of what he had assumed was base level normal. So like while he can say he's done with Benny and like not necessarily like reach out, the moment that Benny turns to him, he can't help himself but to come running for, you know, now at least. You know, he wants to, but can't deny himself how he feels and release himself from the bonds of his own past teachings.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay, so he can't let go of the feeling that dating a vampire is wrong, right? That's what you're saying? Okay. Either you hold on to that belief or you therefore let go of the relationship, or you let go of the beliefs and you hold on to the relationship. Like it's kind of it's zero sum in that way that like it's one or the other, right?
It's so like base level coded into him. Like, it's not like, you know, like, oh, John was a bad father. I'm learning all these things he said were wrong. Like, he wasn't the best hunter. Like, those are things he's coming to learn. But, like, the most, like, simple, like, level 1 rule of we hunt monsters, monsters bad, unlearning that, trying to let go of that as, like, a building block of the foundation of his entire career is something he's having trouble with, which is why he's able to say things like, I need to stop, but his heart takes over when it comes to Benny actually reaching out to him.
So as we get to the end of the episode, though, when Benny calls again, Dean doesn't actually go to him. He tells him that it's the end of the line, and he releases the relationship. He's obviously not ecstatic about it, and to be fair, he does look incredibly sad about it, to be honest. And at the same time, he realizes that he has to choose between Sam and Benny, and in this case, he chooses Sam.
It's literally a breakup, and while he's watching Sam make the decision that hunting with him is more important and they have a goal, Dean does the same. He breaks up with Benny, not wanting to, but feeling as though he has to, because he can't save the world from demons if he's running off to rescue Benny every time he calls. Now, I want to ask you what you think Dean would have done regarding Benny if Sam had chosen to go back to Amelia.
Oh, I think that would have been very different. I think that if, I don't know if we got to that line yet. Now I don't know. I think that Dean... Okay, hold on, because I'm trying to word it without using the line now. Okay, so I think that in Purgatory, Dean very much felt like a very genuine version of himself, right? Like, I think particularly people like Dean who mask a lot of things, like they have different versions of themselves. And I think in Purgatory, there was nobody to mask for, because the people who were there that he was interacting with was Cass and Benny. And he could really be himself in a way that I don't think Dean had really allowed himself to be before. Coming back into like the real world, quote unquote, I think that he put those masks back on, and that's why Benny had to go, right? Like one of the masks that he's wearing is like the hunter who doesn't consort with like vampires, etc., right? Like that is one of the masks that he's wearing. And in this case, he chose that over Benny. But I think if he didn't have to pick that because Sam kind of put him against the wall, like he was like, you have to decide, I think it might have been very different.
Oh, I could fully see an alternate, like, and I'm sure it's within the fan fiction sphere it exists, but I could see a world where Sam goes back to Amelia and quits hunting, and Dean goes off to be with Benny and, like, continue to basically be hunters on the outskirts because it's a demon and a hunter working together but still doing good. I'd watch that show.
I would also watch that show. If we move on to Sam, he obviously has his own breakup arc in this episode, right? Granted, it is a little bit different. It's a little bit more heterosexual, and so, like, people saw that a lot more than they saw the Dean and Benny breakup. So he starts off the episode, and he's actually ready to break up with Amelia, like to release Amelia back into her life. To be entirely honest, it's not like he was the one who was still holding on to that. Like, he was kind of tricked into going to see her. So again, different situation in this case, right? But then she makes him doubt. She's like, I don't know what to do with the fact that you're here, right? And so they decide to take some time to really think about it. But then Sam doesn't show back up at the motel room, although Amelia does, and my heart really kind of broke for her. Like she said, at least now she knows.
Yeah, like my heart breaks in this moment because this really is like, and again, in my heart, I truly believe this is the end of Amelia. Like, if she comes up, it'll only be in passing conversation. I don't think we're going to get a continued arc of her story. Again, prove me wrong, show, but I feel like this was a perfect conclusion to her story. And, like, it's so painful, like, both for her having made these incredibly difficult and vulnerable decisions only to be alone, knowing only to herself and to us, the viewer, that she's going to return to her life as it was, but always wondering and not knowing what could have been. And Sam will never know either if she has shown up. So, like, he too must be left wondering, like, what if I had gone? What if she was there? What if she wasn't there? And I feel this has to be, like, this has to be the end. Like, they can't, like, if they draw anything more out of this, I'll be so mad. Because it was such a perfectly heartbreaking and eye-opening way of ending this. And it did a lot despite, like, you know, so many flashbacks leading up to this. It was a great story.
I think it shows, you know, this particular ending for them shows that they were never really on the same page, right? Which is something that we'd known. We've been talking about this. But again, I do think that that particular relationship was very beneficial for both of them in the moment that it happened and for the time that it lasted. It's just sad. It's just sad. The next thing that I have in my notes, I do want to mention that arguably this is both for Sam and Dean, but I'm bringing it up here. And we've been talking mostly about Sam doing this or in relationship to this for the last couple of weeks now. But Sam also releases his anger for Dean regarding Benny, right? Like we finally kind of get a bit of a reset for the brothers where Dean isn't angry at Sam anymore for choosing a girl and Sam isn't angry at Dean anymore for choosing a vampire. Like they've both been able to kind of like let it go and move on. And let's be honest, like this is just a good place to be for the brothers. I like it when they're on the same team and not yelling at each other about girls and vampires, you know? Like, ugh.
It's kind of like a return to status quo, an emotional, like, it's an emotional Bobby's place.
Aww.
Deep down, both are hurting for a lost love they had to leave for a perceived greater good. But while it's not spoken about, they do have each other in that brotherly bonding way of not needing to speak, just, you know, being brothers together and, like, moving forward and, like, supporting each other without saying it.
But you see, you're even saying it. They broke up with their significant other for the greater good, right? They Peter Parkered their boyfriend and girlfriend.
That's the Peter Parker move. That's 100% what that is.
They Peter Parkered them. Like, I'm telling you. Listen, I was talking to Rochelle about something. I can't remember what it was because that, like, this is something that I used to say in high school when like I don't want to say the original Spider-Man, but like the original Spider-Man live action movies with Tobey Maguire and Kirsten Dunst. were coming out. And like, he breaks up with her at one point because he's like, we can't be together. And like, I hated that so much that I, like, since then I've been calling, he Peter Parkered her. Like,
but it's so accurate because you know for a fact that in 6 episodes from now, if there's a call from Crowley being like, I have Amelia or I have Benny, they're going to come running out the gates to save them.
Of course. Oh my God. Anyway, so let's move on to Cass. We kept this one for last, and it is kind of tragic because his relationship with Release is just really very sad, right? Like, not that breaking up with people you love isn't tragic or sad, right? Obviously, but I do think that Cass experiences something incredibly sad too in this episode. Unlike Sam and Dean, like, they have each other at the end of the episode, like, he leaves them and he's on his own. So Cass experiences a release of memories in this episode, and like, we've all had a moment where like a smell or a sight or an emotion just like unlocks a memory, and it's like, oh my God, I completely forgot about this until now. And we talked about that specifically, actually, this season when Dean misremembers his exit from purgatory. Well, Cass has a similar moment when he sees Samandriel being tortured by Crowley. Like, he starts getting these flashes of memories that he didn't even remember that he had, where like Naomi is like drilling into his head, and like, it creates 2 things for Cass, I think. Like, the first thing and the most like apparent is that it freezes him like entirely. Like, he cannot move when he's remembering this. And again, like, this isn't unusual for people with PTSD, so we're seeing that represented on screen. Now, the second thing that it does is that he realizes that he can't fully trust himself for his memories or even his actions. Because Cass went into this like wanting to save Samandriel. Like, he's very clear about his intention to save him and the reasons and the motivations that he has for wanting to save him, which is like, I've killed so many angels, I need to save this one. That's a very strong motivation, right? But like, the moment that he says, that Samandriel says that like heaven is controlling them, Naomi immediately orders Cass to kill him, and Cass just does it. And it goes so incredibly against like his own wants that it's like, it was really chilling in that moment. Like, he even goes like, what have I done? Like, he did not want to do this, but he did it anyway. And so he's like, and that's where I bring in the Peter Parker move, because he's like, okay, I don't have full control over myself right now. I need to leave Sam and Dean so as not to put them in danger.
The entire reveal for Cass was so hard to watch. Like, we've never really seen him like this. Like, sure, we've seen him without powers or not at his pinnacle of ability, but never have we seen him like broken with fear like this. And it was like a strong visual having him cowering as he did. And it really drove the point they wanted to make home. And it hit me. And again, I cannot speak on the PTSD part, but I'm glad you brought it up, because knowing what I do know on the subject, again, greatly educated by you over these past few years, I can understand it while at the same time not having ever experienced it to that level. And I think, again, this is also thanks to you for education, but to Misha Collins for the incredible acting prowess. And to your second point, Cass beginning to realize he cannot trust his memories is so strong, as he has been trying to deal with his memories and his past actions since being sent to purgatory. And now he's like making some small strides towards healing, and he has to suddenly reel with the fact that like, oh, my memories aren't all what I think they are, and I can't trust them anymore. And like you said, the number one thing for me when he had that moment was like, oh, Dean not remembering purgatory exactly the way we said it was. Like, it's such a great parallel between the two. Ugh.
So this is one of those episodes for me that I just don't really enjoy watching. It's usually a skip, personally. And I was trying to figure out why. It's really the body horror of Samandriel being tortured by Crowley and his Dr. Goon Demon. And it's not like it's particularly awful, right? I've obviously seen a lot worse, but it's just like there's blood, there's like very loud, high-pitched noises, like he's screaming in pain. Like, it's just not fun at all for me. And I was kind of wondering actually why this particular episode chose to go so hard with the body torture, because like this is like for Supernatural, right? Like they leaned into it, whereas it's not really something that usually the show leans into, especially not without a reason. So I started thinking about what the reason could be, and I immediately thought of like the conversations that we've been having like within our podcast team about like horror themes and tropes and like what they are used to convey, right? And body torture is often about the loss of bodily autonomy. And who loses bodily autonomy or like realizes that they don't have full bodily autonomy in this episode? It's Cass. So when we're watching Simandriel being tortured, we're really watching what was done also to Cass in order to control him and his actions better. And so it doesn't make me like the episode anymore, really, but I definitely have like a deeper appreciation and understanding for it now.
I'm very, I don't want to say like okay with body horror, seems like a weird sentence, but like I am very divorced from the like, I understand it's cinema, so I'm able to like cut that off in a weird way. It's a very weird headspace I have with that kind of stuff.
I mean, that's perfectly fine. It's fiction. Nobody is actually getting tortured here, right? Like
the screaming,
magic of movies.
You were right.
Yeah, the screaming is hard.
The number of times I had to adjust the volume this episode for my own comfort was weird.
So there you go. Like, I think it does tell us something. It's not done gratuitously. It is about like Cass losing his own bodily autonomy. And I think we're going to need to talk about that a lot in the rest of this season.
This week we have a message from Ruby. Before we listen to it, we want to remind you to send us a 3-minute voicemail. To respond to anything we discussed today or ask us a question, you can use the recording app on your phone and email us that recording at carryingwayward@gmail.com.
Hey, this is Ruby again. I was just listening to Season 2, Episode 11, which I believe is called Playthings. But you guys, Drew especially, who I think in my last couple of voicemails I called Dave, and I am terribly sorry for that. This is what I get for binge listening to them in the loud car. But yes, Drew mentioned Deanisms, basically that Sammy was acting like Dean ever since he learned about the secret that John had told him. And I thought that was super interesting because, one, that's exactly what he's doing. And two, that's something we see a lot, or at least over and over again as the seasons go on, which is that when people who know and love Dean think that they did something monstrous or believe they might do something monstrous and want to make up for it, they tend to, for better or for worse, imitate Dean and his Deanisms. And I just find that very interesting and something I hadn't really thought of before. And of course, because it's Dean Winchester, it kind of breaks my heart, because it makes the contrast between how he feels about himself and how others feel about him so stark. Because if you ask Dean Winchester, especially later seasons, Dean Winchester, whether he's a good man, he probably wouldn't be able to tell you yes. Like, Dean doesn't think of himself as a good person. He doesn't think of himself as someone who can be or is even worthy of being saved or loved. Like, he is an instrument to be wielded. He is a martyr to be sacrificed. He is a soldier to be commanded. But you can see in the behavior of everyone else around him, if you were to ask them, is Dean Winchester a good man? they would tell you he's one of the best men I've ever met. And they try and model themselves after him. And it's both fascinating and heartwarming and an utter tragedy. So that's what I've been thinking about. Again, I'm loving the podcast so much. It's reminding me of some of the best parts of fandom, and even though it also makes me absolutely cry because Dean Winchester always makes me cry, I'm really enjoying it, and I can't thank you guys enough for that. So I will talk to you again later. Bye.
Oh my God, Ruby, thank you so much. Honestly, Dean Winchester also makes me cry a lot. I mean, I think we all see a lot of ourselves in him to a certain degree. I know I certainly do. I was going to say, I've been watching Merlin, but the truth is that I have watched Merlin. In the little break that we've had, I have watched Merlin. I haven't watched season 5 yet, but yeah, seasons 1 through 4 of Merlin. And one of the things that like I find really interesting about this show is the question of like, what happens when good people make bad decisions? I think that like Supernatural also asks this question, although framed very differently. Because Supernatural, again, is very concerned about like monstrousness and goodness as like two kind of opposites of each other, and how like monstrousness doesn't really fit within goodness. Like, you know, we just talked about this today about how Dean had to choose between like Hunter being a hunter, which is like a good thing in his mind, right? Like it's a good with a capital G, and like his vampire boyfriend, and which is bad, capital B, according to the hunter lifestyle. And again, like both things are very much like depicted in that way. And so Ruby, when you were asking, like, you know, if you were to ask Dean if he's a good man, he would probably say no. Like, I think that there's a lot to be said about Supernatural and the characters within Supernatural that have trouble kind of like seeing a full and accurate picture of themselves and even others, because they have a tendency of like idolizing others, while tossing aside like the bad decisions, the bad things, and like, you know, small b things. I'm not saying like Lucifer type of shit. Like I'm talking about like bad decisions that they've made. And so, yeah, I don't know. This is very informal thoughts, but thank you so much for making me think about this. I appreciate it a lot.
Yeah, Ruby, thank you. I love this message. And don't worry about the name thing. I didn't even catch it. So if it was a thing, went over my head. I think there's something. I think this is, again, like a perfect episode to encapsulate this, because Dean is such a... It only occurred to me now, but like there is this thing with Dean right now where he is learning something that Sam has already learned seasons ago, which is that there is a difference between, as you put it, Mary, lowercase b bad and uppercase b bad. Like, just because something is on paper a bad thing, i.e. a vampire, doesn't mean it is a bad thing. So I think we've seen Sam kind of come to terms with the idea of like letting monsters go and like being like, are they really the monster just because they're physically a monster? And Dean was always the like opponent to this. So seeing Dean evolve and grow to a point where he's starting to look at these things and going like, oh, I was wrong. And in this episode, he ends things with Benny, not because Benny is a monster or a bad thing. It's, as Mary kept putting it, to be the Peter Parker and save Benny and be able to go on his way and do what he needs to do and save the world and not put Benny in harm's way or have Benny as a distraction from his end goals. And I think there's this something else you touched on that I want to go to, and I think we're seeing it less and less almost now, which is kind of funny, is that there's these Deanisms, these things that Dean does that are like so cliche to his character that when other people do it, like the first time we meet Garth, I feel like Garth almost picks up on a little bit of the Deanisms because he sees Dean as like the big bad cool hunter who I want to be like. And we're seeing Dean almost drop these Deanisms now because they were part of this disguise he was wearing, where, you know, he was very much little like what Jean trained him to be. And now that he's like shedding that outer layer, he's releasing those things, to go back to our theme. He's releasing these Deanisms he picked up to basically act a certain way that he's now thinking isn't really the way to be acting anymore.
What is your reflection and call to action this week, Drew?
The part that really stuck with me in a very nice way, it was the end when Sam joins Dean on the couch with I assume what looked like a bowl of chili and a beer for some good old brotherly TV watching time. I just want to remember like those good times with friends and family where I could just be around folks and not need to be doing something other than just existing in the presence of people I care about. And Mary, your reflections and calls to action this week?
Well, so we didn't talk about Kevin in this episode, frankly, but he does have a moment that I find really relatable when Dean is asking him like to make another demon banishment bomb or something like that. Kevin is like, dude, this isn't as easy as like you think it might be, right? Like the ingredients are super duper hard to find and making it isn't easy either. But Dean is kind of like asking for more, as if it was just a question of like microwaving a frozen dinner or something, you know? I really related to that because honestly, lately it sort of feels like everyone around me wants more of something, and like, dudes, it's really not that easy. Like, it's not as easy as you think it might be. I don't know, I'm just feeling called to be a bit more intentional with like how much of myself I give, because I don't have an unlimited supply of like time and resources and patience and creativity and all of that stuff. So yeah.
This was Carrying Wayward, a supernatural podcast produced by Rochelle Castellano, hosted by Mary Vigouroux and myself, Drew Schulman. Thank you to everyone supporting us on Ko-fi or Patreon, especially our bunker supporters, Elle, Jeremiah Thomas, and Simone. We'd also like to thank Jake Lionheart for our music, and Jacqueline Tucci for additional sound editing. Head over to carryingwayward.com to become a patron or a Ko-fi subscriber, and for our merch store and socials. And rate us a review on Apple Podcasts. Carry on, our wayward friends.